You are listening to Aim Higher, a Catholic podcast designed to instruct and to encourage the daily practice of our faith.
Welcome to another episode of the Aim Higher podcast. I am Sister Catherine, and joining me today is His Excellency Most Reverend Giles Butler, OFM, which means, of course, the titles always give it away anyhow, but we are on to the Virtue of the Month series, the month of June, which is obedience. So before we get started with our quote, do you have anything to say, Your Excellency?
Oh, obedience. Very good.
Yeah. That's all right. I just that was my just simple title.
Okay.
For the recording. So anyway.
Hello everyone, and hopefully we'll have a productive discussion today.
God willing. Anyway, so to start off with our quote, and this is from St. Vincent de Paul. Obedience consists not alone in doing what is actually commanded, but also in a continual readiness to do on any occasion whatever may be imposed. Okay. Any comments?
All right. The obedience of religious, the obedience of children, the obedience of employees, it all falls under basically the same category. We look at our obedience, the fourth commandment, where we must obey our parents, and that obedience is all-encompassing, really, all our life. Every one of us has something to obey, someone to obey. We always have that over our head, if you will, and I hate to use the term over our head because actually obedience gives us freedom. We are set free when we are obedient, and thus we can place the burden of responsibility really on those who command, whereas those who obey always can practice virtue, even if what they are commanded to do might be wrong or ill-advised. The obedient child, the obedient employee always gains virtue by the obedience, by doing what is asked of them. And it is really something for us to strive for, to practice true obedience or perfect obedience, as we look forward to in religious life, whereas we enter into the sentiments of the superior to do the will of the superior, really without having to be told, without questioning, but really to become one in mind, one in spirit, so that the subject actually becomes an extension of the superior, working in whatever field it may be. And in the religious life, that's what we're looking for, is the religious to look at the superior as the representative of God. I wish to do God's will, and to know God's will, I must see that in my superior, and therefore I wish to obey my superior in all things except sin. But that is the desire that we should be striving for, and not only to obey an explicit command, but even their wish, their desire to really adopt the mind of the superior, the will of the superior. And of course, all of this is preparation for a higher obedience, and that is obedience of God. And it is principally God whom we are obeying when we obey. It is God that we're looking forward to becoming one with and uniting with. And really with all these virtues, you cannot really separate them from charity or love of God. The love of God has to permeate all the virtues, all of our lives, all our whole being. And the same is true with obedience. I mentioned obedience is entering into the desire, the will of the superior, and that will is principally motivated by love. And so our obedience needs to be motivated by love rather than fear. There is a servile fear, servile obedience, and we are looking for a filial fear, that is the fear of a son rather than of a slave. The love of a son the obedience of a son rather than the obedience of a slave that is being forced or coerced to do something that they do not want. So really, obedience means that I want what my superior wants, not just that I physically obey, but I actually have the desire of my superior. And ideally, we enter into this with God as well, so that during our life, we want what God wants. Our question is not what I want, but what does God want? What should I do today? Well, what does God want me to do? What is the will of God? What is the Spirit of God? And that has to enter into us and really animate us. You have a comment there?
Very nice. Well, I know you're talking primarily about religious, but I can't help but see how those in the world also, it's really the same, whether it's child to parent, adult to, well, or worker to boss, student to teacher. It just, you don't escape having to answer to someone else, whether even someone that has their own business still has some sort of dedication, or their client base. If not for their clients and pleasing the clients, they'd have no business. Their business would not succeed. So even though, yes, the business owner can dictate the hours, whatever he wants, which I think anyone that has known someone that owns a business, they work a far more intense schedule, oftentimes anyway. They're actually almost always on 24/7 in order for their business to succeed. Not always all the time, but frequently. But just to have that mindset, when I have my own business, I can do whatever I want, kind of, but not exactly. Just as the child that can't wait till they're 18, get out of their parents' house, get their own place, and they'll be able to do whatever they want. Well, you're still going to have to, well, first of all, you're going to answer to your landlord. There's property management. You have to treat the property with a certain amount of respect. Otherwise, it's going to cost you heavily.
There's mortgage to pay, so you got to pay attention to the bank. You've got a landlord. You've got loans for your car. You've got health insurance. You've got a million things that you have to obey.
And while there are maybe some people who can live in filth, because I think a lot of kids look forward to the day where they don't have to clean, at least not under their parents' commands or encouragement, if you will, the parents' schedule. They look for when I want to. I still remember when I first came here and we still had the school going, so a couple students, and they were, and one of the tasks given to me was to vacuum the dining room after dinner every night, no matter what. Not a problem. Took less than 5 minutes, but they were just like, why are you doing that? But I mean, if it were me, I'd wait maybe once a month to vacuum. And I just chuckled because, of course, I probably, maybe at that age, would have probably thought similarly. I don't know. I was kind of a tidy child, but I just said, how long did this take me? 5 minutes? Less than 5 minutes? I said, well, first of all, I was asked to do this. This was a chore given to me, so I'm going to do it. But also, it took less than 5 minutes. If I were to clean on your schedule, I'd be spending at least an entire day cleaning, and I don't want to spend an entire day cleaning. There's other things to do. So you are, for lack of a better term, you're a slave to yourself. If you want certain things, you have to work for them, and you have to cooperate with someone, and that's how I think obedience is just so prevalent. It's just you can't escape it.
You can't escape it, but you can learn to love it. You can learn to enjoy it. You can find great pleasure in it. And it doesn't have to be a burdensome. You keep mentioning slave, and I know in our modern society, we think of slave as a very negative term. But we have in the religious life, we have slaves to the Immaculate Heart of Mary, slaves to this, and we look upon ourselves as slaves to God, whereas we belong to God. We do whatever God wants, and in this sense, slave doesn't have that negative connotation. And really, yes, we are all slaves to someone or something. If we are not a slave to virtue, we become a slave to vice. If we're not a slave to God, we become a slave of the devil. If we are enslaved to our own passions, we are enslaved to the devil. And so we are all enslaved because we are all subject to some authority over us. And the wonderful thing is that we get to choose. Very often those who are physically sold into slavery have no control over who their master is, the disposition of their master. But today, in spiritual life, at least, we have a choice over what we're going to be enslaved to, who we are going to love, who we are going to serve. Granted, children don't get a choice of who their parents are going to be, but I often tell children, your parents didn't get a choice of who you were going to be either. I'm sure
Sorry, Mom and Dad.
if they had their choice, they would have picked a better child than you. But you are what God has given them, and so you are the perfect child for them, and they are the parents God gave you, and so these are the perfect parents for you. And each one is different. We have different parents, we have different needs, we have different personalities. Where God has placed us is the perfect place for us. And we need to learn to work within those realms and that frame of reference and not outside of it. I know today we've got all these people who want to change their gender, they want to change this, they want to change that. And our society is promoting the idea, oh yeah, you can change your gender, you can do this, you can do that. And it is nonsense, and it is a kind of sickness because there is no end to the changes. Whatever you think is going to make you better, it's only going to make matters worse. And really the true happiness is going to come with realizing this is who I am, this is where God placed me, this is how God made me. How do I sanctify myself in this situation? What does God want me to do here? Rather than thinking, what do I want? I'm not happy here. Let's go over there. Let's try this. Let's mutilate my body. Let's take hormones. Let's do something. Let's change and destroy what God has created, what God has planned. And we're going to do something completely different that is demonic, and we become slaves to the devils. I look around, it's summertime now, and a lot of people are showing a lot of skin at the airport. And I can't help but notice the ink all over people. And I kind of chuckle to myself because years ago I asked a young woman why she got herself tattooed. She wanted to express her individuality, her uniqueness. Well, in the airport, if you're standing looking down the hallway, somebody far in the distance, all you see is green skin. And they all have green skin. There's nothing unique about them. They are all basically the same. Oh yes, some have the right arm, some the left arm, some both arms, some their back, some their legs, but it is a fad. It is these poor individuals are all the time thinking they're doing something unique, expressing their individuality when they are doing nothing but going along with the crowd. They are emulating the fashions of the time, and these fashions are the detriment. So they become a slave to fashion. And we see this slave to fashion in dress and the way people speak, the way they act, the way they think. It all comes into their imitating someone, something, and that is what they've become a slave to. And they're pursuing some unreachable goal. You're never going to have the perfect tattoo. You're never going to have the perfect haircut. You're never going to have the perfect anything, because we're not meant to be receiving perfection here on earth. Perfection here on earth is something we strive for, that is always going to be just out of reach. And God wants us to constantly strive for perfection because He wants us to strive for Him. He wants us to love Him. And so the way to do that is to obey Him, to see, what does God want of me? Why did God make me a man and not a woman? Or why did God make me a woman, not a man? Why did God make me a child, not an adult? Why am I an adult and not a child? It's because this is what God has made. And this is where I belong. This is what God wants of me. And so once we realize that, then the simple question is, what do I do? What does God want me to do? Not how can I destroy God's will? How can I rebel against Him? How can I, be cool in the eyes of the world? How can I serve the world? How can I follow along the fashions? How can I be popular and acceptable to the people around me? We can forget all of that, and we are truly set free when we're looking to serve God and serve Him alone.
Especially when you're going through your comparisons of, adult, child, adult, and et cetera, I start thinking, why am I tall and not short? Because I still, I do struggle. I'm getting better at that. I mean, God made me tall and He has His reasons. And sometimes they're made known to me when I can see something on a top shelf that no one else can. So that's the plus side. And if I'm in a crowd, you probably can find me. So I also, a little while back, we talked about just our attitude is so important. We often see circulating online, choose joy or choose happiness. And it really does boil down to, choosing God is choosing happiness. We could become bitter about a command or a request, or we could just see that, and really anyone who is overseeing you is someone you should treat the same respect you would treat God. You're supposed to see God in your superior. And I know we say superior, but that just means you're supposed to see God in your parents. You're supposed to see God in your fellow workers, your boss. Really everyone. And it just, you really can't. You can either be, angry and upset all the time, or embrace it.
Embrace it and enjoy it.
Well, we're supposed to take up our cross. And I know we've talked before about how people can be our crosses. I know you've mentioned I'm your cross sometimes, and it took me a while to wrap my head around that, because it sounds bad. Like, it sounds like, well, I don't want to be your cross. I want to help you, make things easier for you. But sometimes it's, when you're someone's cross, it doesn't mean that you're doing a bunch of stupid things. Not necessarily trying to make your life difficult. It's just it's someone to manage. Being in charge is definitely not what it's all cracked up to be. Managing people.
It gives you an appreciation of God's position, what He has to deal with. And then, the constant need, really the superior becomes the subject. Everything's, we see parents as being in charge and command. But if you stop and look at it, the newborn baby sits in its bed, cries, and adults get up, tend to whatever the baby needs. You need to change the diaper, you need to be bathed, you need to be fed, you need to be kept warmer, you need a blanket, you need the blanket taken off, you're too hot, you're too cold. The adults are there to serve the child. And even when the child gets older, the father goes off to work, the mother goes off to work. For what? So they can supply the child with daycare, with the toys, with whatever they think the child needs. They work to obtain that, and really they have become the slaves to their children. And I think really parents need to walk a delicate line there, because becoming a slave to your child and satisfying your child's every whim cannot become your form of obedience, because God made you to command, to lead. Yes, the infant in the crib needs you, is dependent upon you, but not the same way are the adolescent, the young child is not the same as the infant in the crib. And we need to teach the children a little bit of independence, but more importantly, self-denial, self-sacrifice, that I don't need my mother to tend to every one of my whims when it comes up.
Well, it's interesting to me that I read a few months ago, maybe even a year ago, talking about the idea, and we don't necessarily know when it exactly started, but the idea that the parents, in particular the mother, is solely responsible for the entertainment of her children. And that if you are not making sure that your child is stimulated in some way every day you have them, every waking hour you're feeling as a parent, or just even there's a lot of messages out there that you only have so many years with your children, make the most of it. And that's a lot of pressure, because the thing is with social media, and we all know this, you only see the glowing parts. You don't see the mess in the background. You don't see that maybe these people that go on all these elaborate trips, do all these outings, are up to their eyeballs in debt. They very well could be, or they could be really good with their money. I don't know, but a lot of times, most of us can't do those things, and then yet we feel like we're a failure. Because I think one of the things I read was guided more of the traditional family, if you will. Mother's at home, and she's supposed to be always right there, down on the floor with her children, making sure that they're advancing, that they can read at a certain age, or they can do this. And I think that while you should be aware of certain things about your child, at what age they can read and all those things, natural milestones, you can't get obsessive though too. I think not every child learns at the same pace. Not every child matures. Some kids need a little bit more time. But we have such a social standard.
Right.
And I will say that I am grateful, at least a little bit of a positive in this day and age, is that it's not so taboo to maybe hold your child back. I have a friend that decided to wait another year to send her son to school, because he was at the young way his birthday was. He would have been the youngest in his class, and she could see he's not ready for this until she waited a year. And she did get some flack from family members about doing that, because what's going to happen? He's going to be so far behind, but he's actually thriving now. But when I was growing up, I mean, if you were in school longer and you graduate at 19 instead of 18, you're a loser. If you don't go to college right away, you're a loser. And it's just that's not for everyone. Some children need more time, and just passing kids along is not productive either.
Well, you mentioned keeping the children entertained, and that's a 24/7 obligation, the parents to obey their children. And I think really what parents need to focus on teaching their children is how to entertain themselves, how to be okay with themselves on their own. They don't need someone outside of themselves to constantly stimulate them.
And smother them.
The child needs to be able to develop, learn how to play, interact with others, besides just mom over them all the time, 24/7. I can remember as a child, one of the last things we'd ever tell our parents was that I'm bored.
Yeah,
You're bored? Let me find you something to do. We had a little phrase: if you have time to lean, you have time to clean.
Yeah.
Grab a broom, grab a mop, grab a dust rag, do something. Just don't stand here. So we learn to find things to amuse ourselves, to keep our minds occupied, our bodies occupied. I don't know, backyards. We had a lot of things to do, to play, and perhaps that's not available to the children today. I don't know. I really feel sorry for the children who grow up in an apartment. What do they have to do in the house other than the store-bought toys? Where is the imagination? Where is the stimulation? I think, yes, they can get out and go to a park, and they can do other things, go for a walk. But I think really parents need, first of all, to focus on teaching this child some independence, some freedom, if you will, from having to have someone always entertaining them. They don't need to have a screen in front of them. They don't need to have a parent over them to read them a book. We can teach them to read the book. They can look at a picture book. They can do many things by themselves if we'll only encourage it. And I think the tragedy is we're not really encouraging them to branch out, to experiment. And I think the big problem is we're afraid our children are going to fail. They're going to fall behind, and we've got to be there to make sure they don't fall. And that's a big mistake. I won't say the only way to learn, but I think the best way to learn is to fall, is to fail. And then that doesn't work. Let me try something different. I will remember a mistake much longer if I'm allowed to make that mistake.
Yes.
If you prevent me from making the mistake, I'm not going to remember it.
Right.
And I'm going to make that same mistake again, perhaps when you're not there watching. And, with little children, they're little mistakes. But as they get older, if you don't allow them to experience these little mistakes, their mistakes are going to get bigger.
Well, and it's one of those things that if I had a thought, and it just the whole time it was there now. Well, one of the things I was thinking about was, and I read probably like a year ago, because I know that children on screens are really adults too. Like the screen time is pretty exorbitant. And sometimes it's actually, or that you don't realize how long you are on a computer or tablet or phone.
Or that you become a slave to the screen.
And this one woman, it was just their first child, and probably about 4 years old, and she didn't really think much of it. In the afternoon, he'd be on it, and thought she was in control of how much time usage, and didn't think he was going to be so connected to it. But then one night, it was time for dinner, and she told him, it's time to put it away. It's time for dinner. He said, not yet, 5 more minutes. So she complied, gave him 5 more minutes, and then 5 minutes were up. She said, okay, now it's time to put it away. We're going to have dinner. And he told her no. And then she goes, gets her husband, and her husband says, put it away. It's time for dinner. He says no. And that's when they realize, we've got a problem. We need to fix it. So, of course, she takes the tablet away. They put it away. And they tell him, you are not going to get this back. And that was, he put up a fuss, went to bed. Next day, he gets up and asks, can I have my tablet back? She says, no, we're gonna go on an adventure. And of course, time comes to leave. He's assuming that they're going to go in the car and go somewhere. She's like, no, we're going to go in the backyard. And she brings out a chair, brings a book, and sits down, starts reading. And he's just standing there. He said, what am I going to do? Figure it out. Use your imagination. She said within an hour, he found a way to entertain himself. He was having a blast because she realized he's losing the ability to imagine on his own, to come up with a game. And I'm not saying that screens are evil. I think that there is things that we do need to do, and we all probably do need to work on some self-control. But we do need what's the right? Just play without restriction. I'm not saying not in an unsafe way, but just explore. There was plenty in their backyard too, she said, for him to play. It's like they're not short of other things, but it was just so much easier to put him in front of a screen for an hour while getting ready for dinner. And I get that. I truly do get that. And I'm not knocking anyone that.
Well, I was reading a study about the screen time, talked about the dopamine connection between the screen and our psychological attachment. And this is not just dopamine as a pleasure seeking, but this article, the study was suggesting that dopamine actually is like a binding tie that we can't give up. We feel the need, we must continue. If we walk away from this, we are going to suffer, that we have to stay here. So there's a psychological effect of the dopamine with the screen that I have to be here, I have to stay here. And if you take that away, we feel this incompleteness, we feel this unrest because we need to be there. We're going to miss something, we're going to miss out. This needs to be done. I have to get to the end of the game.
Yeah.
I have to get this mark. And of course, when you get to the end of the game, there is the next episode that is, they put in their little teaser there, and the dopamine is kicking in. I can't stop now. I can't stop now. And it is truly an addiction. It is the same thing as with smoking or drinking or drugs, whatever the addiction may be. This dopamine is kicking in, and we seldom realize, I think, that these screens are a form of addiction. And I try to point out to people that the internet is good, the computers are good, all that God has made is good, all that God has given us the intelligence to make has come from God. It is good. The evil is what we make of it. How we use these good things is what makes them evil. The evil comes from within us, not from outside of us. And so again, teaching our children to deny themselves, to be able to say, I don't need this dopamine high. Um, this is a way for me to deny myself or to take up my cross, no matter how enticing the teaser is. I can walk away from this. It's just a game, and it takes quite a level of maturity that I think many adults don't even have. So I think this has to be explained to children. We have to help them develop the maturity to walk away. We have to develop an independence, as I say, so that they can entertain themselves. When I first came up here for religion to the seminary and entered the Franciscan order, we had quite a bit of quiet time, grand silence, and I didn't really notice it until my family came, and my sister says, it is just too quiet here. I want to scream. What is this? And one of the conferences, Bishop Lewis was talking to us about silence and working in silence, keeping silence. And that is a time that we reflect upon ourselves. And those who cannot stand the silence generally cannot stand themselves, because in the silence is when our conscience speaks to us. In the silence is when we can hear the Holy Ghost, our guardian angel. And really, if we're not pleased with our conscience, this is unbearable. And so we need to turn on the radio. We need to turn on the television. We need to turn on the internet. We need to turn on something so we don't have this silence where we reflect inwardly, where we stop thinking. And I think really this is where we need to focus some attention on teaching the children to obey. And it may be as simple as teaching them to obey a clock. Okay, here, when the big hand reaches this number, it's time to stop. Whether you're finished or not, we are ending as soon as this hand hits this point. As soon as the chimes on the grandfather clock go off, it is time. Put down whatever we're doing for the love of God, and this is a form of obedience. And we're doing it. Yes, we become a slave. We become obedient to a clock and to the time. But this is something that is good for us. The children can learn that the alarm goes off, I get out of bed. I don't hit the snooze button. I don't complain. But in holy obedience, or for the love of my mother and father, so they don't have to call me 10 times, I'm going to get up as soon as the alarm goes off, and I'm going to obey the clock.
It would be a lot less painful if you just did it that way. I still can think about when my younger brother, not my youngest brother, my younger brother, get him up for school, and my mother's tactic was just to keep saying his name over and over, and it would go on for a half an hour, and it was just, and I'm frustrated to the point where I just want to grab him. Of course, he was like 17 at the time, and on the wrestling team in football, so I probably wouldn't cut and slam for it. But I was also thinking when you're talking about the whole silence and why that kind of silence stirs our soul so much, and it's so true. But I know you weren't saying that there was something wrong with your sister. Your sister was probably just used to coming from a large family. There's just a lot of going on. It was just complete.
There's always background noise.
Yeah, that was just a complete contrast. But if you ever get a chance to spend time in some sort of silence, a sort of retreat, if you will, even if it's a retreat for yourself, pick a day and say, you know what, I am just going to sign off from everything. And it could be very, I think, fruitful. It might be a little challenging, but I think it's worth to take some notes, and anything that comes to mind would be a great thing. Then you can bring to your confessor. It's funny when you learn how much you don't talk when people come around, because there were times here when you're gone on the weekend and I was here by myself. I didn't speak a single word at all because I'm not in contact with anyone, and of course I'm thinking all the time, so I don't, I just didn't notice it.
Well, I think if we would practice a little bit of silence, we would soon hear things that we've been ignoring for so long. If you can go for a walk in silence, it is amazing, the birds singing.
Mm-hmm.
You can hear the humming of was it cluster flies? You can hear the frogs, the toads,
The water from the fountain.
water flowing. There are many sounds out there that we just ignore day in and day out. And all of these things, when we begin to notice them, we begin to appreciate them, and it should lead us to thoughts of God.
Right.
See how good God is, wonderful things, how beautiful this is. I remember years ago, we would record, I think it was Bishop Lewis's sermons, and he gave a talk early in the morning, and a lady commented upon that recording because it was early in the morning and you could hear the birds outside singing because the windows to the chapel were open, and it was so beautiful. St. Francis, the Franciscans, we hear the birds singing in the background while we have the bishop preaching to us. And so we can hear these things in the background. Of course, if we were paying attention, we probably would have closed the windows to silence out all this other noise so you can hear just what we want you to hear. But really, the being able to hear these other sounds is a sermon in itself. It is refreshing. It is encouraging. And I think really our children need to be able to discipline themselves, to put things aside, and to be okay with being silent, being on my own. I don't need someone talking to me. I don't need a television. I don't need a computer. I don't need a cell phone. I don't need a screen. I can have time to just sit and think and contemplate. And I can work out a lot of problems all by myself if I'm given that time to reflect. And I think our children are lacking in that time of reflection. Why don't they think? Why are so many things difficult to our children? We have not let them develop or to take the time to think, to analyze, to examine, to study. And as you mentioned before, everyone's education comes at a different pace, at a different rate. And you may need a child to be able to sit and play in the mud, to hydraulics. He will study hydraulics on whatever level he can with wet dirt and mud, and pile it up and slush and play in the sandbox, to build castles and tear them down, to rebuild, to use their imagination will teach them a lot.
Well, and it's in that type of play that there is silence being practiced, and who knows what's going on in the mind of that child at that time. And I get where there are some activities where you're hesitant to let your child explore too much because it does mean more work for you because they're dirty, but letting them wear themselves out,
We have a washing machine.
Yeah, you can't put them in the washing machine.
We have a bathtub.
Yes, it just holds them down. They'll love it. Well, and one of the things I was thinking about earlier, and I guess I can kind of work it in here, was I had a discussion with a lady a few years ago. Her mindset was that kids should not have chores because they're just kids. And I think what came up as I was telling her about my friend's oldest child and how he loves to get up. One of the things was to get up in the morning and fix mom coffee because they had a Keurig, and then and he'd love to do some cleaning, and she would build on that. And I was just talking about how we had certain chores that we were always faithful to them, but kids generally like to help. But she just said no, she didn't agree. And I don't know how that worked with her grown children. I don't know what she exactly did at the time, but her mindset now is that no, kids should be allowed to just be kids. And I just let that go, I guess, because, partly someone older than me, she's a mother, what do I know? But I do think we all should have some basic skills.
Well, there should be time for children to be kids. They should have time to play, time to amuse themselves. I am all for that. But also, in that development, they need to learn responsibility. They need to learn obedience. They need to learn the satisfaction of doing something for someone else. Whenever I do something for myself, it's kind of a letdown. But if I do it for someone else and they show me a little bit of appreciation, that feels good. And that feel good is something that we want to continue. So if the child can get up in the morning, even though he's probably woke mom up before, and during the whole process, he's probably going to make a mess in the kitchen, but he can get the Keurig started. He can bring the coffee. He can put in the sugar or cream and figure out exactly how mom likes it. And it's probably not perfect. Mom could probably do a better job. But the simple thank you, I appreciate this, will make him feel wonderful. I've done something. And then she can say a little less sugar next time, or a little more sugar, a little more cream, a little less cream. And it is something that he will take positively and think, okay, I can do this for someone else. Not only for my mom, but now for my dad, for my boss, for my teacher, whoever it may be. I'm willing to put forth the thought, the effort, because I derive a sense of pleasure, a sense of satisfaction in giving.
Yeah.
And it's the peace prayer of St. Francis of Assisi. It is in giving that we receive. And truly, the child who learns to give, the child who learns to sacrifice, the child who learns to obey is going to be the happiest child, is going to feel the greatest satisfaction in this life, and the greatest joy day to day, even in the midst of crosses, even in the midst of difficulties. I see so many people, it's not just young people, but they are totally devastated. They're crushed by some obstacle, some problem that enters their life. Whereas those who have learned to obey God, they see that this is a cross, yes, but God has sent us a cross. What does God want me to do with this cross? And it's not questioning God. Why? What did I do to deserve this? I shouldn't do that. It's not feeling sorry for ourselves. Oh, this is a problem. Let me think about this, because that's how I solve problems. I think about it. I look at the situation. I can work this out in my mind. If I do this, this is what's going to happen. If I do that, this is what's going to happen. And I can project into the future, and I can analyze it, and I can pray to God to be enlightened so that I find the best choice. And then if I'm allowed to act on my decision, right or wrong, I will learn something from that. If I have an adult who says, no, if you do this, it won't work, just believe me, trust me, do it my way, there's very little education in that.
There is. And I understand to some degree why sometimes we want to do that, because I recall sometimes efforts we might have made as children and we botched it up, and my mother's like, I should have just done it myself. And I get that frustration. You're out. It's, both my parents had to work, and even if mom stay-at-home mothers work too. But I get that it is exhausting to guide and correct children, especially if it's multiple commands. Because I also know the defiant child, or the child that you could be talking to them that look like they're listening and they're not. And I get that is terribly exhausting, but I think we all know that anything worth having, anything worth enjoying is something we have to put work into. And I know that if we just stay true to those efforts, hope, that your child will become an adult that you want to be around. That's always encouraging me. You see families that still get together regularly.
Instead of you're 18, you're out of here.
Right. Right. I mean, see, it was interesting for us because all of my mom's siblings had that mentality with their children, and even my dad's brother. I do believe my cousins still live with her parents through college, but there was a lot of emphasis on college, and there was a lot of emphasis on my mom's side. Once you're 18, you're out. And my parents did not have that same philosophy, although I'm sure maybe there were times they would have loved the house to themselves, but there got to a point where they really did like having us around. I mean, shortly before I came here, the last few years, I worked from home, and it came very helpful as my mother's health declined that I could still be there. I was working, but I could be there, which eased the pressure on my father, so he could still go to work because he still had to work. He's the one, the income, the insurance, it was necessary. So it just kind of came full circle. I never really felt, there was maybe a little bit of pressure of letdown that I'm not as good as anyone else because I still live at home, but it was, and then there are just some families that do like having their children around even to that point. I mean, if you've got the space and you can all live together, why is that looked down upon? But they, often people look down upon the adult child that lives in the basement, mooching off of the parents is not, but that's not what I'm talking about here.
Wasting their time on the screen.
Right. But we all contributed to the household in some fashion or another.
Well, I like the way you put it, raise a child that you will want to be around as an adult, or raise the adult that you will want to
be a friend,
friend with and share time with, that you won't mind, sharing your house with and your meals with, but that is really a child who is conscientious, thoughtful, considerate. All these qualities we need to look into and develop in our children, but we have to develop them in ourselves. And so really the first one we need to obey is God, and then we need to see that right order that God has established and really regulate our entire life in this obedience and teach our children to be okay with who they are. This is what God has made. Yes, you may not like it, but this is your cross. Embrace that cross. And in embracing that cross, it will be made sweet, it will be made light, it will be made a joy. And I think one of the mistakes we're having today, or I see today, is that we're not telling children, just be patient, this too will pass. It's not always going to be this way. You're a child, you're developing, things are changing. The whole world isn't going to stop and it's all going to collapse here because this isn't going your way. Just be patient and bear this cross patiently for a little while, and you'll see that tomorrow it will be different. It's not so bad.
And I know it's hard to convince the child of that, because I can think back to times when I was younger and would be mortified by something I did and be mortified for weeks, months, maybe even years. And now similar things will happen. I'm just like, okay, sure. But that's a development, that's maturity. Sometimes it's hard to convince the child that, people still love you when you've done something stupid in front of your friends and you think you've lost all your friends. And of course you say, well, if they're really your friends, they'll love you anyway. But it's as simple and as complicated as it can be. But we all can look back and see, yeah, it really wasn't that bad. It turned out okay. I mean, I know sometimes if I could go back to 7th grade me, what would I do differently? I mean, I suppose I shouldn't say I would love to redo my teenage years, because obviously I am where God wants me to be right now, living. I can't go back, so why go back? But we should take that experience to help guide our youth, but not control them. As a child's learning their prayers, sometimes you need to let them stumble over the words. If you just swoop in and take over for them, they're not going to learn to say the prayer correctly. You have to let them, goof it up. I mean, I still kind of stumble on the mass prayers every now and then. So
it's that way, I think, throughout education. I enjoyed mathematics, I enjoyed science, and I could not understand why my peers weren't getting this. So what's the problem? It is, and of course, I realize things that come easy to us makes it more difficult for us to teach. But I was elated when I could find more than one way to solve a math problem. And teaching grade school to little children, I would explain the math as it's in the textbook. And if they're not getting it, I said, well, wait, just set that aside. Let's look at it from this point of view, and being able to approach it from different perspectives and say, well, if we can't solve it this way, let's think about it this way, or let's think about it this other way. There is some way that we can present it to them. We just, as a teacher, as a parent, we just have to find out the right way for them. And what works for us doesn't always work the same way for everybody else. And In mathematics, it's either right or wrong. And of course, if you hand in your paper and you got the big X's there, okay, you did it wrong, but you don't know why you did it wrong. It is important to look and to see why, what was I thinking? How was I thinking? Where did I go astray? How did I not arrive at the right answer? Um, Rather than this is wrong, okay, move on. No, here's the right answer. Well, just giving me the right answer doesn't help me figure out where I went wrong and how I'm supposed to prevent going wrong again. Um, because it's not just, 1 plus 2 equals 3 or 2 plus 1 equals 3. I can get physical objects and we can count them, we can manipulate them. We can do all of these things, but it's more than just you wrote 1 plus 2 equals 4. Okay, that's wrong. Why is that wrong? Well, let's examine it. Let's look at this. Here's one object and here's two objects. We put them together, now count them. And are there 4 objects there? That's why this is not right. Why did you write 4? Because I was just memorizing and I saw 2 and perhaps I was thinking 2 plus 2 equals 4. Okay, you made a mistake, but now let's learn from it. It's not just cross it out, make an X, and then I'll tell you the right answer, and you put that in, and the next time you just memorize it. And that was the problem I had in mathematics is we memorized our addition, we memorized our times table. Nobody took the time to explain this is what addition means. This is what multiplication means. And the same is across the board. Here's your grammar. This is this spelling word here, you got it wrong. Here's the correct one. Well, why is this correct and mine is wrong? Mm-hmm. Well, this word came from the French, which came from the Latin, and here is the development of it. And we can get into as much detail as you want. But in our modern language, this is what the common acceptable spelling of this word is. And of course, that is constantly fluctuating and changing, which is quite frustrating to some people. But on the other hand, we can look at this and we can look at history, we can look at science, we can look at all of these things, but most importantly, we can look at religion, all right, and the faith and the obedience. Why is this wrong and not that? Why should I do this and not that? And we can look at it from different perspectives. Why do we not eat meat on Friday? Well, because the church says don't eat meat on Friday. That works for some people. That's an acceptable answer. Others, they want to know about Christ's death on Friday and his passion. And this is means a little sacrifice for us. This is an opportunity for us to do penance. This is a little bit of our cross that we need to carry. And there are many ways we can look at this simple command and why we should obey it and how we should obey it. And we need to be open to explain this to our children from various angles, various perspectives. And yes, in the beginning, you tell the children, do it because I told you to do it. Okay, that's great in the beginning. But over time, they have to come to an understanding or else they will never do anything for themselves. They will have to depend completely on you to give them the command to do what you're telling them to do. And then they will look at you wondering, is this good enough? Is this right? Is this wrong? And they will not have the intelligence or the confidence to come to that conclusion themselves, to step back and say, I have done a job well. I could have done better here. They need to have this self-reflection, this self-appreciation of who they are, and that comes really from having time to think, quiet time.
Also living with the consequence if it doesn't quite turn out right. If a child's insistent on dressing themselves, and I get how sometimes it's just like, all right, fine, that's what you're gonna wear. And that may not be warm enough, or you're going to be too hot in that. Not anything that's going to cause any health concerns, but We all know sometimes say, all right, you need to learn your lesson. You need to learn that sweatshirt on an 80-degree day is not going to be a good choice. I mean, and I'm not talking to the point that your child sweats and is near fainting. I think they'll learn quickly, and then you can kind of remind them the next time when they're insistent that they want to wear their sweatshirt, or they what is popular. And I went through this too when I was a teenager. I didn't want to wear one of those big old winter coats in the winter. A hoodie, that's it. And I know it was impractical, especially taking the city bus to school, but then I stand out in the cold and I then wised up. I mean, there's only so much that you can really try to minimize. I mean, because we all know that sometimes we have to live with our choice. The other thing that was just kind of popping in my head as you're talking there, just the
Well, it comes back to the idea, I think again and again, giving people the freedom to fail. Okay, this didn't turn out the way you wanted. What did you want to turn out? How can you make it turn out that way next time? What can you do to make it better?
Well, and we talk about, when you're talking about the school subjects and we talk about religion, we've talked about this a lot with the whole idea of teaching the catechism. I mean, yes, maybe at a certain age, the parroting the responses has a place, but at some point you really need to start challenging them and make them think. And we're trying to do that more and more in our classes. I was actually just talking with Father Anthony. We kind of reframe the question to see what they know, what they understand, and encourage them. It's like, you do know this answer. So tell me how it is that you know in your own words. It was made me think of the term hypostatic union. And usually when people hear that, like, you tell us what hypostatic union is, and it kind of, you get a deer in headlight moment because I'm not, I don't know. And I realize we do know. A child who's preparing for First Communion knows what hypostatic union means, because it is the union of the divine and human natures of Christ. And one of the questions that's asked is, how many natures is Jesus Christ? Or how many natures does he have? He has two natures, divine and human. Boom, you know the answer. Just because it doesn't, maybe because you can't word for word doesn't mean it's wrong. And I know some teachers that will grade you if you don't copy, word for word how it is in the book. They will dock points off of that, which to me is bizarre. And I understand wanting to stay in the comfort of exactly what the catechism books say and just follow it word for word, lesson by lesson. But what are we really teaching them? They're not being able to allow to think. They need to think about it and be encouraged. And I know we also hold back because we're like, well, what do I know? Well, we talk often that you never stop learning. You should never stop studying. Always trying to advance. And that's part of being obedient to God's laws as well. And I know we're fixing to wrap this up, but there was a question that came up. It is on obedience, a little different direction, but I was out running some errands with a friend, and she was driving, and we came to a stop sign, and she rolls through it, and this is what she called, and she knew she did it, and I guess it's called a Sheboygan roll. That's what they call it in Sheboygan, if that's Sheboygan, Wisconsin. I'm not saying that that's just people in Sheboygan do that. I think people all over the world do it, and it just brought to my mind something I read a few years ago about a woman sharing her confessor guiding her on obedience, which is being obedient in the little things such as traffic laws. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, we as Catholics especially, we really should be, and I say this as someone who has a little bit of a lead foot, not as much of a lead foot as Brother Pascal, but I do have a little bit of a lead foot. But I do sometimes think about that. Well, me going over the speed limit is saying what? No. And if I'm saying no to civil authorities, I'm also saying no to God, right? Mm-hmm. I know that this could be somewhat touchy. I'm not trying to make people overthink this, but at the same time, he was just pointing out that because sometimes you think exercising virtue, striving for virtue involves super big things, but just being faithful to those little things. And the little things also include not speeding, stopping at a stop sign. So I guess my question is what? I don't know what my question is now. I think I kind of...
Well, even if the obedience isn't a serious matter, we need to practice obeying simply because it puts us in the habit of obeying. So therefore, when it becomes a serious matter, it comes more easily to us. If we just brush off, say, our children, well, it's not that important. I told them to do this, but they're not doing it, so just forget it. It's not a big deal. It's not that important. I believe that's the wrong attitude. We need to teach them obedience in these little things, so that when something more important comes along, that we can rest assured that they will obey
And they'll appreciate
and
it.
they'll appreciate it. The example, or when the trumpet sounds, we have to prepare for battle, we prepare for war. But if the trumpet is indistinct, or we're accustomed to, when the trumpet blows, to ignore it, or there's somebody just playing around, then when we're under attack and the trumpet blows, we're not prepared for battle. We will be caught unawares because we haven't learned to obey. And it can be a simple matter, as I mentioned, obeying the clock. We set the alarm clock, the clock goes off, under holy obedience, get up. It's not a big deal. Get up, turn the alarm off, and of course there's all kinds of tricks. Put the alarm away from the bed so you can't reach it. So you have to get up to turn it off. But practice obedience in these little things. And don't wait for the superior to say, I command you in holy obedience. You must do this. I'm commanding you to obey. We don't want to get to that situation. We want to teach the children obedience is simply doing the will of our superior, doing the will of our parents. My mom asked me to do it. That is enough. I don't need a command. This is her will. This is what she wants me to do. This is what I will do. And they need time to reflect and absorb this and come to that conclusion. I love my mom. I don't want to disappoint her. This is what she wants me to do. She has her reasons, whether I understand it or not. I will obey. I will comply because I love her. And it's not a big deal. And when I learn to do this in the little things, when she yells at me to get up because the house is on fire, I will get up out of bed because I am accustomed to obeying, listening. And when she tells me to do something, I jump and do it, put aside whatever I'm doing, and to obey that command. And, it makes me think of the religious. In the old days when the scribes used to transcribe the Bible or the Psalter by hand, the religious, when the time would come for office and the bell would ring calling them to the chapel, it said these scribes would put their pen down immediately. They would not bother to cross the T or dot an I or finish a word, even in the middle of a word. They would stop, put the pen down because the bell rang, and they said, I must obey the bell. This is God calling me. And we need to develop that for ourselves, but even in our children. When I'm commanded to obey, it's not give me 5 more minutes, or mom called me for dinner. Okay, whatever I'm doing can wait. This is more important.
That is true, and it made me think about, I was reading somewhere, I think it was a suggestion for a Lenten penance was to not hit the snooze button. To just, and that it's those little things that we don't think about. And I will add that I'm not saying that people that break traffic laws or push boundaries are, it's just something to think about that I never thought about until I read that. And so I'm not like looking down on anyone because I do know the temptation to speed, but it's just something to consider. And those little disciplines, I think, because we hear the word discipline and we think that that's a terrible thing, but it's a great way of life if we just, those who are trying to have better health, it does take discipline to exercise, to eat well, to sleep even, to, really put sleep as a priority. And I know that some people have them and say, well, I'll sleep when I'm dead. Well, that's really bad logic. You need to sleep. God designed our bodies a specific way. We need sleep. We need food. Because I also know that it's very tempting to withdraw take away food because you want to lose some weight. But I was telling someone recently, like, they couldn't understand why they were famished. She's like, well, because you're hungry, you need to eat. It's not a bad thing to need food or even want food sometimes. Yes, we could always fall in the lines of excess, but if some days you're hungrier than others, that just means your metabolism could be working very well. Maybe you're bored, or maybe you need more water, although water is not a replacement for food. And this is not going to be a nutritional talk, but I get frustrated because I've heard those lines and they still pop up today. And I'm like, sometimes what you need is a snack. And I think we all know if we do just stop and have that snack, we actually do feel better. We can get things done. Punishing yourself by not eating as almost like a sign of virtue, if you will. I did air quotes, and no one's going to see that, but that makes you better, superior. It's just really
makes you grouchy and makes
Yes.
you irritable, and your job doesn't get done well, and
Well,
everybody suffers around you.
And that was something Father Anthony and I talked about when we were discussing the second law of the church, to fast and abstain on days appointed, because we're talking about the different. Everyone's different and what they need for their small meals and their larger meals. And I said, if you're someone that can, just have a dry piece of toast and a cup of black coffee for breakfast, and you're still kind and not a bear, and you can get your job done, then yeah, I think that's enough for you. But I would not be able to do much on just a cup of coffee and a dry piece of toast. I physically could not. So it's just not everything's the same for everyone. But I don't necessarily think, even if you can manage your temperament, I don't think a piece of toast is sufficient. But again, this is not a nutritional talk. So,
taking care of our body is obeying God's law.
Yes, thank you for saying that.
Eating, sleeping, and of course, virtue is in the middle. God created our body with these needs. They're not just wants. And that's, I know, difficult for us to determine what is a need and what is a want. We teach our little children that because they need this and they need that. And we say, no, that's what you want.
Yes.
Your want is not a need. And there is a distinction, but we need to know that ourselves. We need to learn that ourselves and obey the needs that God has given us, that these are keys to our sanctification. And so overdoing it to one extreme or the other, overeating or fasting too much, depriving our body, making our bodies ill, is not virtuous. It's not obedience. It is rebellious because we're seeking our own will. Mm-hmm. God made my body so that it needs food and sleep, and I'm going to deprive it of food and sleep because I don't believe God, I don't trust God. I'm going to do my will rather than His.
I'm glad you brought up, because it was really actually reading in my Catholic faith, discussing the fifth commandment, which is thou shalt not kill, but it's more than that. You are required to take care of your bodies. And that's something I actually get into when I teach catechism, is not just what can't you do, but what you're also required to do. And that is to take care of your body. And it wasn't until I really read that it kind of, the light bulb hit that I need to start figuring out the right mindset. The not eating is not a good choice. I mean, it really, up until that point, you really couldn't have convinced me that I needed to start eating regularly, because I'm like, well, I'm fat. I don't need food, right? I need less food. And I was, even though I could see the symptoms of being ill, it still did not matter until I read that and said, I'm harming my body. This is contrary to God's command. I need to figure this out. I need to get out of this. And I eventually did. There's still always like that little background that I have to kind of, work through. It's never going to completely leave, but realizing that all God made is good. And even though maybe we're supposed to live in the world, but not of the world is still good because God made it, and we can, be longing for heaven and still appreciate and enjoy the time He's given us here on earth, and practicing virtue, growing in grace, and meriting that grace and meriting that reward in heaven. And we can't do that if we're just counting down the days till death, and maybe, on unintentionally like forcing it by, our grumpy demeanor, our lack of proper nutrition, our lack of sleep. You can't force God's will, but we in order to really perform properly everyday tasks, we do need to take care of ourselves physically, but also spiritually. And I think with that, just the practice you can get into also when rising at the alarm clock is to say a Deo Gratias. Here's another day. What can I do better? Take a few 5 quiet minutes just to reflect, and just as we're supposed to before we retire for the evening is to examine our conscience. We do know where we fell short most of the time, and we know what we could improve on. So I think that
And when you practice getting up with the alarm clock, you'll soon discover you'll be awake before the alarm goes off. And you're there waiting.
Yes.
But then when it does go off, it startles you.
True.
But in those moments before the alarm goes off and you're awake and you're waiting for the alarm to go off, that is a beautiful time to thank God, to give your Deo Gratias, to make your plans for the day. How am I going to serve God today? How am I going to love God and love my neighbor? What does God want me to do today? And it is a time of quiet reflection, thinking, and we must get into the habit of this so that we can teach our children. It's okay to need quiet time. Go sit in the corner, or go sit in your room quietly, without the TV, without a screen, without a game or radio, but just quiet time so you can think. And we used to put the children in a corner to let them think. Think about what you just did and why that was wrong. Think about how we can do better. And just a few minutes of time out. We need that ourselves. Our children need that. And it is a wonderful way to practice obedience. My mother wants me to sit here on the steps quietly for 5 minutes. I will sit here. And that is a time when your child is they may be watching the clock for 5 minutes and see to get back up and to get moving again. But it will be a wonderful experience for them when they can say, I'm getting grouchy, I'm not feeling well, maybe I'm hungry, I shouldn't have lashed out at my sister or whatever. Maybe I need to back off and sit down, reflect. I need some time out.
Yes.
Time out is not a punishment, but it is a tool that we can all use to improve our lives here on earth, but more importantly, our supernatural lives. This ability to look within our souls and examine things and to think and to study them really in the quiet reflection of our hearts and minds. And I think that is the key to obedience, because that is the key to loving.
That's wonderful. Well, I think that is a great place to end, don't you?
Okay. Deo Gratias.
Deo Gratias, can we get your blessing?
Benedictio de omnipotentis, Patris, et Filii, et Spiritus Sancti descendit super vos, et manet semper. Amen.
Thank you.
You're welcome.